I may be drinking an Izzy, but this video is not sponsored. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag because it is June now. There are so many books that I said I was going to read this year that I have not read, so I am freaking out a little bit. Let's not put too much pressure on ourselves. I'm a mood reader, so it is what it is. But without further ado, let's get into the mid-year freakout tag. Okay, the first question is the best book I've read so far. So I have two books for this, because it's nearly impossible to pick one because I've read so many amazing books this year. But I have to give The Song of Achilles a shout out, obviously. I'm obsessed with this book. I read this book for a video. I read Noel Gallagher's favorite books, and I really did not think that I was going to enjoy this one as much as I did. I thought I might like it because mythology is interesting to me, but I didn't think it was going to be an automatic 5 out of 5 and make me cry. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what this is about. I'm sure you've seen it everywhere, but this basically follows Achilles and Patroclus through the Trojan War. Achilles is a war hero and Patroclus is just kind of there. The idea that Achilles and Patroclus are in a relationship is not really developed in a lot of other retellings, so Madeline Miller really wanted to lean into that and show what a relationship between those two characters would be like as they kind of grow up together and go from a very strong friendship bond to a romantic bond. It is such a beautiful book. The writing is absolutely stunning. If you haven't read this one, please read it. It's amazing. And my other favorite book so far would have to be This Is Pleasure by Mary Gateskill. This was a book that Carley Thorne, or UnCarley on YouTube, recommended. She said that this was an incredible book and really shaped the way that she thinks about the Me Too movement. So that sounded right up my alley and super interesting and something I wanted to know more about. So I read this and it was thought-provoking and absolutely beautifully written. Mary Gateskill really does have a talent for describing things in very unique ways. She really brings a new perspective to the Me Too movement that I hadn't really thought of before. It's a very nuanced perspective, and I think there should be more of this kind of perspective out there. So this book follows two characters, one of which is a successful editor and he's risen to the top of the kind of editing world. He's been accused of sexual harassment in the workplace, and the other character is actually a friend of his who had experienced some harassment from him before but kind of continued to be friends with him anyway. And it also talks about his wife a lot and how, you know, one person's actions can affect so many people in different ways and how those people on the periphery of something like this have to deal with it. So like I said, it is very nuanced and very interesting and I would highly recommend it. The second question is, what is the best sequel so far you've read? This isn't necessarily a sequel exactly, but it is in a series and it's the closest thing that I have. So I chose Wings of Fire Legends Darkstalker by 2AT Sutherland. So I know I've talked about the Wings of Fire series so much on this channel and it is my favorite series of all time. But this year I read Darkstalker for the first time. I finished it in January, I believe, but it had such a lasting impact on me. I think this book enriches the series so much. It gives so much backstory and history to this character that comes up in arc 2 of the series, and it's just all about him and how he became a villain and kind of examines the ideas of whether or not he is a villain and what makes a villain. I think this is the best written of all of the Wings of Fire books, and honestly the characters are so well developed, probably more than a lot of the other characters in the main arc. And yeah, I was so impressed with this book when I read it. I definitely want to read it again. So that's the best sequel-ish thing that I read this year. Moving on to question 3. New release that you haven't read but want to. I have a few. These are all books that I've gotten pretty recently, so I guess no one can be mad at me for not having read them yet. But the first one is Notes on Grief by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I love her essay collections. I've read Purple Hibiscus, which is her novel, or one of her novels, and I liked it, but it wasn't like my favorite thing ever. But all of her essays are incredible, and I just had to read this one as well, and the cover is so beautiful. This shouldn't take too long to read, so I'm hoping to read it soon. The next new release that I haven't read yet is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is a signed copy and I'm super excited about it. There's the signature. He did it in purple this time, not green. He always signs in green. This is actually an essay collection. It is nonfiction, and it kind of just examines, I guess, different issues in the world or different topics. It is really broad, but I just had to buy it without knowing too much about it because it's John Green, and I love the Vlogbrothers. I've watched the Vlogbrothers for years. I loved them as a kid, and I feel like this will be a really natural kind of extension of that sort of style of just talking about different topics. So very excited to read this one. I don't know when I'm going to get to it, but hopefully soon because it is a new release, and anytime I buy a hardcover, I feel terrible if I haven't read it in the first like month of owning it. Next I have Clara and the Sun by Kazu Ishiguro. I think that's how you pronounce it. I've seen this literally everywhere. Everyone is talking about it, and I did break down and get it because I just finished reading Foe by Ian Reid, and it kind of talks about AI and does it in a really interesting way from a really interesting perspective. So after reading that, I kind of looked up what this one was about because I heard it was about AI, and it sounds kind of similar thematically. The author won the Nobel Prize in Literature, so I've heard amazing things about this one, and I'm sure it's amazing. I love this cover too, it's so beautiful. And then finally for new releases, I have A Lonely Man by Chris Power. This basically just follows two friends, I believe two British men, both writers, meet by chance in Berlin. That's what it's about. But the real reason that I got this is because I read Mothers by Chris Power, which is his short story collection, and gave it a 5 out of 5. I thought his writing was incredible. The way he conveys emotion was very interesting. And just his style of writing feels really unique and new, and I absolutely loved it. So as soon as I saw that this one was coming out, I had to go find it, and I ended up finding it at a independent bookshop that I went to recently, so I was so excited to get it. Can't wait to read this one. Hopefully I can read this one soon, because I have been anticipating it for literally months, so I should probably pick it up soon. Okay, moving on to question 4. This question is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year. So I don't know how to pronounce this author's name, but this is going to be a translation, and it's called Magma, and it is coming out on July 13th. And this just sounds like kind of an examination of a woman who's dealing with problems in a relationship, and it sounds a lot like a lot of books that I've been reading recently with kind of unlikable or unreliable female main characters who have to deal with a relationship. I saw it on Goodreads and it sounded really interesting and right up my alley, so I'm hoping to go pick that up that day. Hopefully I can find it somewhere on July 13th, but that is my most anticipated release right now. Okay, question 5. What is your biggest disappointment so far? Let's talk. So my biggest disappointment would probably be Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. I loved the Pisces. I read the Pisces last year, I believe, and just it was so strange. That one is about a woman who's going through a serious mental health crisis and ends up meeting a merman, and it's kind of about their relationship. The writing in that is so poignant, and it brings up so many topics that you would not expect to see in sort of an urban fantasy situation. That book is so weird and sexually charged, and it's so much, but it is amazing, and it's kind of one of those books that is so strange that you just can't look away. So I ended up rereading it this year, and after reading it twice, I was so excited about her new book coming out, which is Milk Fed, and that one honestly was just not my favorite. It was definitely weird. It still had that kind of like magical realism or urban fantasy kind of style to it, but it didn't fully lean into the fantasy elements. There were definitely small elements of it where you're kind of like, maybe that could be magical or maybe that's fantasy, but it didn't lean into it fully, and I think that's where it went wrong as opposed to the Pisces, because the Pisces, you really have to suspend your disbelief, but you're really not thrown off by anything weird happening because you just know it's going to be weird. Whereas with Milk Fed, it was just weird enough to kind of bother you, but not weird enough for you to be like, okay, this is a strange book and I'm here for it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of the distinction in my mind, and I just don't think any other book by her can live up to the Pisces, because that book is just incredible, and if you're into weird shit, highly recommend that book. It's great. Okay, next up is question 6, the book that you were surprised by the most. And for this one, I have to go with Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I read this for reading Kat from Paperback Dreams' favorite books video. So I made that video and I decided to read a romance because Kat also hates romance and she read this one and loved it, and it kind of got her into some romance. So I wanted to read this one and see if I could even get into the genre. And honestly, I loved this book so much. The way Talia Hibbert writes these characters, the romance doesn't feel rushed, it doesn't feel cheap, it doesn't feel insta-love-y, it feels fully developed, and each of the characters independently had their own lives, their own story to tell, their own past traumas and things they were dealing with, so each character felt like they were fully rounded, thus the romance felt fully rounded because they were two characters who were very independent and had their own stories and they came together to create a new story. Since I was an English major, I feel like I have a lot of that internalized pressure to read like scholarly or literary things, and I can't just have fun and read a fluffy book. So this book kind of helped me get away from that mentality and kind of let me know that I can just enjoy a fluff book if I'm feeling like that. So I highly recommend this if you haven't read it. I know that most people have read it, but this was definitely the most surprising. I did not expect to love it as much as I did. Okay, question 7 is your favorite new author. So I have two choices for this. The first of which is Mary Gateskill. I talked about her before, so I have This Is Pleasure and I have Bad Behavior. I have read both of these. This is just a single short story, kind of bordering on a novella, and this is a collection of short stories. The topics that she discusses are so interesting and I think really necessary to talk about, and the fact that this book was written in the 80s and just contains so many controversial topics that I wouldn't expect anyone to write about during that period, it really makes this an incredible book. This was a 4-star while this was a 5-star, just because I feel like with short story collections, if you're not attached to every single one, it's hard to rate it a 5-star, but I did really love the writing style. There are so many quotes in here that I thought were just brilliantly done. Yeah, I'm definitely obsessed with Mary Gateskill. I do want to read a lot more of her work. And my second sort of new favorite author would be Ariana Harwicks. She wrote Die My Love and Feeble-Minded, both of which I read for a translated literature vlog. Her style is just so unique and interesting. The way that she describes things is so unique. I have never heard anyone else describe things like that. I don't know how much of that is the writing and how much of it is the translator. I think it's mostly the writing, but I think these are translated very well. I ended up reading them pretty much back to back, and I'm so glad that I did because I have that kind of comparison between the two of them. And if Ariana Harwicks publishes anything else, I will absolutely buy it. It's going to be an auto-buy author for me, honestly, because both of these were just absolutely incredible. Okay, question 8, your newest fictional crush. I'm gonna have to go with Red from Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Honestly, probably in part because I don't really read a lot of stories about people who I genuinely like or am interested in. A lot of the books that I read have a lot of like unlikable, unreliable narrators or characters in them, so I would not really have a crush on any of those kind of characters. But Red is just a very sweet, thoughtful, vulnerable kind of guy, and if I had to choose a fictional crush, I think it would be Red. Alright, on to question number 9, my newest favorite character. So I have 2 new favorite characters. One of them would have to be Patroclus from the Song of Achilles. He is so sweet and innocent, and he genuinely loves and cares about Achilles so much until the bitter end. I found his narration so beautiful to read, and I think overall he's just a very wholesome and lovely character. And my other favorite character would have to be Moon from Moon Rising. I read this one at the beginning of the year, and Moon is a mind reader, so I loved getting to hear all of her kind of thoughts about everyone else's thoughts and all of her commentary, and I think she's just such a relatable character in that she's very nervous, she's anxious, but she's sweet, she's lovable, she wants to do right by everyone, and I just really love her. Okay, next up is question number 10, and it is a book that made you cry. So The Song of Achilles kind of made me almost cry, but I did actually finish this book while at work, so I couldn't fully cry. But I will say that Radio Silence by Alice Oseman did make me cry. Not necessarily at the end, but there is a scene between two characters just kind of arguing and having it out, and that scene did in fact make me cry. Maybe not weeping, I was not bawling my eyes out, but I did shed a few tears. So again, thank you so much to Paperback Dreams for making me read that book. It was a lot, but totally worth it. It was a really good book. Okay, on to question 11, a book that made you happy. This is kind of a hard one because a lot of the books that I read are not happy books, but I will say there is one Wings of Fire book particularly that made me very happy, and that is The Poison Jungle. So this one has a very tiny dragonette in it that is so adorable. The character on the front cover is Sundew, and she's a leaf wing, and one of the dragonettes from the hive wing tribe ends up kind of glomming onto her as kind of a maternal figure, sort of. And there are just so many adorable scenes between that little dragonette and Sundew that just made me laugh and made me so happy. So if I had to pick a book that made me happy, it'd probably be this one. Question number 12, the most beautiful book you bought or received this year. So I have two options for this. Let me know in the comments which one you think is prettier. But the first one is Indelicacy by Amina Kane. Isn't that just stunning? This book follows a woman who is a cleaning lady for a museum, and then she ends up getting out of that by marrying a rich man. So the cover of this is very much in the style of like art in a museum, and what I love about it though is that the title at the bottom is actually in the style of one of those little cards that you see at museums that are beside an artwork that have the artist's name and the medium and all of that. So the cover says, Indelicacy, Amina Kane, a novel, paper, ink, lamination, and glue, which I just think is so perfect for this book, and it just makes for a really intriguing cover. And my other choice would have to be The Blue Fox by Sian. This book is so gorgeous. I love the color scheme. I love the artwork on the cover. The color scheme is simplistic, but there's so many details on the cover, and it just makes it one of the most beautiful books that I have this year, but also one of the most beautiful books I own in general, honestly. All right, moving on to question 13. What books do you still need to read? So honestly, just go watch all of my TBR videos because I can guarantee you a lot of those are not read, but I will highlight a few of them. The first of which is McGlue by Ottessa Moshfegh. I am an Ottessa Moshfegh stan, but I just haven't been able to really get into this one. I started listening to it on audio and really did not like the narrator, so that kind of turned me off from it, but I do have to read this because it is a buddy read and I'm supposed to be reading it this month, but clearly that hasn't happened yet, so this is one that I absolutely need to finish before the end of the year. Then I have two translated works that I've had for the longest and have said I'm going to read multiple times. So I have Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I've heard very intriguing things about this one. It is very short, so hopefully it'll be a quick read. But I definitely do have to read this one by the end of the year because I've said so many times going to read it, and it just sounds really interesting, and I know that it's a book that I am really going to enjoy, so I don't know why I'm putting it off. And then I have Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. So I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which is just the original book, and then immediately bought this one, which is kind of the follow-up to it that has 4 short stories in it. And like, I know I'm gonna love this one, so I don't know why I haven't read it yet. But honestly, I think these two are for translated literature vlogs, and more than procrastinating the book, I think I'm just procrastinating filming that much of a video. And then finally, I have 2 heavy hitters that I said I was absolutely going to read this year and still haven't tackled either one of them. The first one is Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann. This is basically kind of a stream of consciousness novel that follows a housewife in Ohio and just all of her thoughts and feelings. And it is basically 1,000 pages of just wall-to-wall text. I think that a lot of the stuff in this book will be very interesting, and I think overall it'll be a positive experience from what I've heard, but it is very intimidating, especially because I don't really read long books ever, and this is the biggest book that I own. So I will try to read this. No promises, but I will try. And then finally, I have A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I have said I'm going to read this many times. I am going to read it eventually. I need to get it off my TBR before next year. I don't want it haunting me in 2022. I just know that reading this is just going to be a painful experience, and I've been putting it off because I don't want to be sad. but I will do it eventually. Okay, and the final question for the mid-year freakout tag is question 14, your favorite bookish community member right now. So this is a tie between two people that I have been obsessed with on BookTube. The first of which is Jack Edwards. His videos are often very unique. He kind of takes a particular topic and discusses it, or he'll read all books based on one kind of topic and talk about them. He does less of the like TBRs and that kind of thing and really dives into particular subjects and really talks through them. And I love that kind of style. So I really love Jack Edwards right now. And I've also been loving Carley Thorne, or UnCarley, on YouTube. Her videos are very quirky and weird. She has a series where she reads celebrities' favorite books. It's called Celebrity Book Club, and it's so much fun, but she also talks about a lot of other kind of random things. So it's mostly about books and reading, but she also kind of dives into some other life-related things. And I just love her personality. I think she's so much fun to watch, and whenever she does talk about books, she has some really interesting insights, so I really love her. Alright, that is the mid-year freakout tag. I should probably go do some reading now because I am concerned about how much I have to still read this year. I will say that at this point, I have made it over the halfway mark on my Goodreads challenge. I gave myself a challenge of 100 books, and I am over 50 now, so I guess I'm not doing too bad. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you have to read for the end of the year. Do you have any specific goals or books that you really need to read? If so, I'd love to hear about it. But if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!